I grew up in Cincinnati, diverse neighborhood, poor working class. I think to be the man in urban culture, hip-hop culture, is to be self-consumed, to be hard, to be cold. It's all externally informed identity. The peers haven't been fathered, the teenagers haven't been fathered. It's in large fatherless, undisciplined and unregulated and uncorrected. So it was kind of a free-for-all as far as figuring out what life is about. When I was 8 in 1992, my parents got divorced. It was very hard, very hateful, very spiteful. Well, I hated my father because he wasn't present. He wasn't close to me and didn't guide me and correct me and care for me in an intimate manner. And certain things that my mom did early on after the divorce affected how I understood her loving, nurturing, caring relationship. If my mother did not care for me, then surely no other woman could care for me. But I was around my brother a lot. Scott was the most consistent, most present person in my life. What Scott thought of me, there was no higher opinion. And Scott had introduced me to a lot. He had introduced me to drugs, weed, chasing after girls, just acquiring things, having money, stealing, breaking into, people's houses or cars to get things. And what that was, it was an expression of identity because, we weren't fathered and we weren't parented. But high school was just this self-indulgence in what I understood what it was to be a man. I hurt myself, and I hurt my friends, and I hurt girls because I was afraid of being hurt. So I would get close to people, and I would do something to sever the relationship before I got hurt, because I didn't trust men by way of my father. I didn't trust women by way of my mother, but I was really good at looking out for myself. My junior year is when things began falling apart. My junior year is the first time my brother ever went into rehab. So all the glamour of doing drugs and selling drugs, there was all of a sudden a consequence. I had this little car and I just put a bunch of money into it. And the last day of my junior year, the car was totaled. So possessions, right? This prized possession of mine, all of a sudden it was destroyed. And then there was a couple different pregnancies and STD rumors in my high school, which really affected my perspective of sexuality that always seemed glamorous and inconsequential. Suddenly, there were several consequences. So my perspective had been changed about all the things that I was pursuing for worth. It was in the middle of the night, and for some reason, I prayed, and I don't remember the exact words, I don't remember the exact occurrence. What I do recall is inquiring of God, crying out to God, asking of God that although I have stacked upon offense after offense after offense, if it was true that He loved people that behaved in the manner that I behaved, and He would in some capacity reveal it to me to be true, then I was down. I would be His. The prayer ends. I recall to this day the clock right here on the dashboard, 1:00. It's 1 a.m. Go home, go to sleep, and I wake up to my father crying. I had never seen my father cry up to that point in my life. I was 19 years old. And he tells me that my grandma, who was living with us, had been for years, who I grew up with, that Nanny was dead. My dad said it was 7 a.m., and he told me that your grandma had been dead for about 6 hours. 7 minus 6 is 1. Do I believe that God killed my grandma? I don't believe that, and I haven't given it much thought. But what I do know is I asked God to reveal Himself at a unique moment in time. He did that, and that's the day that I became a Christian, August 17 of 2003, because God revealed Himself to be true. Now, That's kind of where it started for me. So I became a Christian when I was 19, and at 21, and June 30th, I was woke up with a phone call that my brother had overdosed. So 2 months after my brother became a Christian, he died of an overdose. I didn't understand why Scott died. To this day, I don't necessarily understand it. I don't need to understand it. What has occurred since then is I have learned more and understood more about this identity in Christ, what it means to be new in Christ. For so long, I had an identity in my neighborhood and in my culture. For so long, I had an identity in my brother. And because none of those things were perfect, and because none of those things were holy, they were to my detriment. But being in Christ, I have never known such freedom to have an identity in the work of God and the person of God that trumps, that is greater than whatever your culture is, whatever your neighborhood is, whatever your family is, whatever trials or tribulations you've ever been through, the good and the bad times. To be in Christ is a more dominant and a greater thing than your experience prior to being in Jesus. To be second is simply to acknowledge who you are following. For me, being Jesus. My name is Sean Little, and I am second.